Hello and welcome to the Faces and Places of Peer Support. My name is Rita Cronice. I'm the coordinator of the APS Virtual Learning Community, and I want to welcome you to A Tale of Two Peer Certifications.
So, my name is Joe Swinford. I am currently wearing two hats at my hip. I am the project director for the New York Peer Certification Board, and then I am also the executive director for the Wellness Collaborative of New York Independent Practice Association, which is made up of peer-run organizations across the state. As the certification board project manager, I am the one who works directly with our certification board to continue the development and operation of the certification for mental health-related peer specialists in New York State. By way of background, I have been involved in peer certification since early 2000s. I began doing a certification in Tennessee. We looked at Georgia because they were the first certification group to certify peer specialists. And being next door, we looked at them, but we decided to go a different route. And I've also worked at the national level through our consumer affairs directors in developing the Medicaid guidance letter that went out in 2007 about what Medicaid looks for the inclusion of peer support and certification for the workforce if a state is going to add peer specialists and peer support to their Medicaid program. In New York, I've been a part of the certification process development since we began around 2012. So I've been around this for a long time, and hopefully I'm able to provide some good insight into the way we do business on the mental health side.
Thank you, Joe. So in the webinar, we use a chat feature. And now I'd like to, again, introduce you, Joe, with the Peer Specialist Certification in New York for mental health.
Okay. So we have, on the mental health side, the New York Peer Specialist Certification Board, and we have been operating since 2016 as an official board. Prior to that, many of these same people were a part of developing the process, but the board was established in 2016 with a direction to establish the qualifications for the workforce, to set the standards for the necessary skills and training to be a part of the workforce, and then by credentialing, be able to quantify who is an appropriately trained and qualified peer specialist to provide peer support on the Medicaid funding side of the behavioral health system in New York State. As far as certification goes, or the credential goes, it's great. It does promote a standard of professionalism amongst peer specialists, but that alone would not have gotten us a certification in New York State in mental health, because most people on the mental health side were very against it early on. They really wanted to see programs, not individuals, certified. So the initial response was not no, but hell no for peer specialist certification in New York State. However, Medicaid funding and that potential funding source really did change that, and Medicaid requires that the state have a process for determining who is a qualified provider if Medicaid money is going to be involved. So we kind of were pushed in this direction, but I think we've done a good job of trying to keep the integrity of what really is genuine peer support in the process. So next slide, please. Our current process on the mental health side for training and certification is really three partners. One is the Academy of Peer Services. They offer a training platform that provides access to free courses for anybody in the state in order to be able to ensure that everybody has access to the basic training that is needed. They also offer the testing platform so that everybody even if you went to some other training, still has to come to APS and do the test so that we make sure everybody is going through the same standard battery of tests to determine their competencies. You don't have to get trained at the APS, but you do have to go to APS to do the testing. The certification board, on the other hand, sets the standards for what is needed as far as competency training. We set the requirements for not only the basic training, but the other portions of what is needed, like that you must be a peer, the amount of practical experience and all those things, and then we handle processing those certifications. Both bodies are funded by the Office of Mental Health. So on our side with the New York Peer Certification Board, our funding from the Office of Mental Health allows us to offer the credentialing process free of charge, even though we do list in our material what it would cost if you were paying out of pocket, just so everybody has an idea of the value of what they're getting. But right now, OMH is providing funding that allows us to waive those fees for people in New York State, and similarly, they do the same thing for the training side on the Academy of Peer Services. So next slide. So what is certification? Certification is really pretty basic. I mean, it identifies what your minimum standards are as far as your training or your knowledge coming into it and your experience. So in order to say we have a skilled workforce, somebody has to set the objective standards that people meet in order to be able to say that. I've been around peer support since the early 90s, and I can tell you that for most of my time in this, we've always looked at peer specialists as I know a qualified one when I see one. It's been very subjective, but in order to move this to the next level and to really be able to have a good, skilled, and qualified workforce, we really had to get more objective in our view of things and setting those standards and experience. And that's what certification is all about, is it's turning that nebulous, I'll know it when I see it, into something that's concretely defined. So this really does help us set the professional standards for those in the field, and it helps us be able to recognize and say to an individual, your skills, your experience that you've acquired in your recovery journey are valuable. They are something that can be tangibly used to assist someone else. I like to use the term the shared lived experience paradigm, because that really is what we're all about. So we're looking at identifying who is qualified to work from that shared lived experience paradigm. Next, please. So in New York State, we set the certification that allows people to be able to bill for Medicaid. Now, other parts of the mental health system are using certified peer specialists because of the quality of the professional standard that it sets, and that's a great thing. But at minimum, you have to be certified if you're going to bill Medicaid for peer support services. So we set up the requirements for how do you document that you have the appropriate training, education, and work experience to be a qualified person working in this field. Again, Medicaid requires that for all people who provide services under Medicaid, and so our certification process gives us an objective standard for measuring people to say, yes, this person does have that. We really are, as I said in the previous slide, looking at how do you quantify who is qualified to provide services from the shared lived experience paradigm or shared personal experience paradigm, because clinicians have a paradigm or worldview, if you will, of a studied, scientific, recreated approach to, I've learned about mental illness, I know it because I've used applied scientific and theoretical knowledge and application and things that have been research based and all that kind of stuff, and that's great. We all need something from a clinical, medical, scientific approach at times. We need that, but there's also the ability to provide services and the desperate need to provide peer support, which is different from that. Peer support says, I've walked a recovery journey, I can help you walk yours, even though yours may not be the same as mine. Our shared personal experience is that we're both on a journey of recovery. And I liken it, if you think of chaplain in the mental health system, working on a paradigm of the shared experience of faith and how they approach individuals. Again, they're dealing with the shared personal experience, but it's about a walk of faith. Here we're dealing with shared personal experience, but it's about a walk of recovery. In both cases, if you're working in the mental health system, obviously you need to know about that, and you need to have some knowledge there, but you're dealing with things in a very different fashion than clinicians. And certification helps us be able to say, yes, you know how to do this, you know the differences, and you know how to apply it to help someone in their recovery journey. So next slide. Just briefly, I don't want to bore everybody with a history lesson, but just briefly so we know how we got here. I mentioned a little bit of this earlier. Initially, OMH was told by the peer community, no, we do not want peer specialist certification in New York State, but we do need to do some online training. We do need to have more trainings available. So OMH began the process of looking at things, and Medicaid came along and said, you're going to have to make it a certification process. So we began working with those same peer leaders to develop this. And one of the things that we did was initially setting up an online training platform with Rutgers University, who at the time was University of Medicine and Dentistry in New Jersey, to have an academic partner to help us have the appropriate academic rigor. And they began providing their trainings in 2014 in order to have trainings available. But those trainings were determined, what trainings were going to be offered were determined by people who were already working in the field. So the people that were providing peer support were there at the very beginning helping us map out what kinds of trainings needed to be available. So next slide. As far as the certification board, OMH took that group of peer leaders from across the state and, in addition to working with the academy, had them help begin to craft the requirements for certification. Over time, that group was then transitioned into the official certification body in order to begin the certification process. And in 2015, OMH provided funding for that group to be able to become the official certification body and take over what had been sort of led by the Office of Mental Health, now by people that are working in the system. So this is a professional credential that is like any other professional credential, determined by people that are working in the field. Those who work in the field determine what the qualifications are for working in it, not the state, although the state does have input into it. That contract initially was with the Alcohol and Substance Abuse Providers in New York State, or ASAP, because they were already doing work for certification on the addiction side. But in 2018, that contract was transitioned over to MHEP, Mental Health Empowerment Project, and so now MHEP provides that back office support, administrative support for the certification board, which is why I'm a MHEP employee. I work to do the guidance of the project and help to administer the project, but I can say honestly that there is when it comes to determining the policy, the direction, and even who meets the standard, all that's done by the board. Our work here is about supporting the work of the board. So next slide. I'm not going to really go into these two slides, just to let you know that we did a lot of work in those early stages figuring out those core competencies. And so these are some of the infographics that we developed as we went along in determining what are the core competencies needed to be a certified peer specialist. Next. So we have a second slide of that. You can see all the different things that we realized that people needed to be knowledgeable of and have skills in areas in order to do that. So next slide. So right now, the certification board offers, as I said, the certification credential. We set the standards. We work with APS for developing continuing ed and other trainings. We are the ones who operate that. So our board has 15 people across the state that do that, and the funding comes from the Office of Mental Health, but the board does not get that funding directly because they are not a separate entity. The Office of Mental Health provides funding through Mental Health Empowerment Project to provide that that program administration, the back office functions, if you will, and the support for the board. MHAP also provides their own in-person trainings, where those in-person trainings are meant to be along the same lines as what's at the academy, but gives people a different ability to get more hands-on in their training or get more direct interaction with a trainer. They still do courses that complement what is done at the academy, and anybody that goes through the MHAP training should be completely knowledgeable of all the things they need to then go to the academy and just simply take the tests and move forward. So next, please. Before I turn it back over to Ruth and Rita, I wanted to kind of talk about something that comes up often, and that is CPS and CRPA and the interaction. And this graphic is something that I use quite often to describe, if you're thinking about, do I get a CRPA certification? Do I get a CPS certification? Do I get both certifications? This may help you in making those kinds of decisions. If you think about the bottom part there, we're talking about the mental health issues that a person has, or even for that matter, your own mental health recovery journey. Is it primarily, is it very heavily steeped in mental health? Is it sort of overlapped with addiction? We know there's a lot of co-occurring out there. The one going up and down is about, are you dealing primarily with addiction issues? So in that bottom quadrant, if you're dealing with someone who has mental health issues and or maybe some addiction issues, they're not really providing a lot of impact on the person's life, and you really, it could be either one. In that quadrant, people that fall in there, really a CPS or a CRPA really comes down to personal preference. Do you want to deal more with addiction issues, or do you want to deal with mental health issues? That really is sort of the guide there. But if you're in that quadrant right above it, where you're dealing primarily with addiction issues, then CRPA is probably the type of credential that you want working with people, and if you're in that quadrant, the type of credential you probably want to consider. If, however, you're down on the bottom there with the one on the far right, the CPS, if you are dealing primarily with mental health issues, the people you're working with are dealing primarily with mental health issues or even exclusively mental health issues, then CPS is the one you want to consider as your certification vehicle, and certainly the type of peer support person you want to have working with you. But if you're someone who has a lot of issues in addiction and a lot of issues in mental health, then somebody with the dual certification of both CRPA and CPS is probably the most appropriate person. And if you're someone with some very involved co-occurring, where you've had a lot of addiction issues along with a lot of mental health issues, you probably have the right set of skills to consider getting both certifications. But as you can see, that's not what everybody needs. So it's not what everybody needs to look at as far as their credential. But it is something that we do need a bit of a workforce that is trained and certified for that. And we've had some discussions with Ruth's group about how we can, both certification bodies can help to develop maybe a fast track or some ways to help people get dual certification if that is determined to be the appropriate process. So with
Thanks
that,
so much.
Rita, I think I'm at the end, so I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks so much, Joe. Really appreciate it. Okay.
Thanks so much, Rita. And good morning, everybody. It's an absolute pleasure to be with you folks on this webinar this morning. Believe it or believe it not, I'm one of those sort of Luddites in hiding. I've almost never been at this end of a webinar before. I think this might be lucky number 3 for me. So please bear with me on the tech end of things. I'll try and make this as smooth as possible. The slide I hope we're all looking at is my business card. And there are 2 items of information there that if you take nothing else away from my remarks here today, I'd be really grateful for you to note. The first is my email address. I really do very much better with email than I do with the telephone. And part of that is because of the challenges that we're here together this morning to try to address. Everything to do with certification is technical. And I think that Joe has done a great job in breaking it down for us this morning from the perspective of the mental health system. But even within Joe's remarks, it's very clear, I think, that there's a lot of technical pieces in there. And those technical pieces often get lost in translation when we're talking. So for that reason alone, I invite you to follow up with me by email rather than by telephone. So that's that email address, rriddick@asapnys.org. And the other piece of information from this slide that I really invite you to take away is our website address. Absolutely everything that I say here this morning is accessible on our website. Absolutely everything you need to know about certification in the substance use disorder system is available on our website. So having said that, I'm directing you to the website for further information. When we're talking here today, when we're gathered here together today, and I notice a number of familiar names on the attendance list, great to see you here. And I notice also some trainers in our field. We're gathered nominally to talk about certification, but not really. What we're here to talk about is ourselves. We're here to talk about us and the possibilities for each and every one of us to have a career in that shared experience paradigm that Joe was talking about, for us to have a career as a peer, for us to have a career in the peer recovery profession. We're talking about ourselves and our new career. And certification is in service career. Certification is a means, not an end. And we sometimes, when we get all wrapped up in those granular technicalities about certification, we lose sight of what's the purpose of it. What's it for? And essentially, what the purpose of certification is to help you build a career in peer recovery. So the questions that I think are most valuable for us to keep front and center are not technical questions about certification as such, because that information is available to us on the website, but questions about myself, my professional goals. What are my talents? What are my interests? And what kind of environment do I best like working in? Am I better suited to the mental health system or to the substance use disorder system? Am I somebody who does want to work as part of a team in an agency where my services are Medicaid billable? Is the peer role either in the mental health system or in the substance use disorder system? Is that peer role a good use of my talents? And these are questions that only you can answer for yourself. I can answer for myself. If I'm proposing to pursue a career in peer recovery, just like any other career I might be thinking about, I do need to look at what qualifications will I need. What are the entry requirements? How do I get on board with my new career? I'm obviously going to need some kind of education and training. I will have new professional ethical responsibilities. I may need to already have some experience in the role, even if I've never been formally employed. And I will probably want to have some kind of certification to demonstrate that I'm competent in this new role, in this new profession. So what I'm inviting everybody to think about today, and as you can see, I've put certification at the bottom, the very bottom of this list. What I'm inviting people to think about today is to focus on how is what Joe and I have to offer? How is that going to serve you and your professional goals, your personal talents, your unique talents, your interests, and your preferred working environment? Having said that, I think this is an opportunity for me to introduce some information that's available to you on our website that I think might be useful as a place to start researching the how. How do I get connected with a career as a peer recovery professional? This document, which is available on our website, is the answer to that how question. 6 steps, a 6-step process, which lays it out for you, soup to nuts, one foot in front of the other, what you need to do step by step if you want to build a career as a peer recovery professional, as a peer advocate in the Medicaid reimbursable substance use disorder system. That document, which is found on our website, is the first of 3 documents I'll be referencing this morning. That's the how. What do you need to know, the basis of the training that you're going to take in order to become competent in the role? That's a second document that's available on the same web page, and I'll reference it in more detail later. And the third piece that I want to reference from our website is, of course, that no certification process happens without an application. If you do not apply for formally for professional certification to either or both of the certification boards, you won't be in our systems, and we cannot process your certification at any stage in the process. So there are 3 things to be mindful for if CRPA is for you. This is the how process We'll talk about what you need to know and how you will demonstrate to us that you know it as we move through this presentation. And as we move through this presentation, I'm going to ask folks, I know that there are a number of technical questions out there. I'm going to ask you if you would listen out for the answer to your question as we move through this material. If you've got your questions laid out in front of you, I'm inviting you to listen up for the answers to them as we move through this material. So what do I mean when I say that certification is a means, not an end? The question here about certification is less what's involved in certification, because that's actually a science, the science of certification. You'll want to be a psychometrician to get involved in the science of certification, and I'm not that. The question for us this morning is, how does professional certification serve my goals? Well, here I'm looking at the purpose of certification identifies me as a professional in the certified role. It sets me up to get a Medicaid reimbursable job, but it might also support a non-medical career, a non-Medicaid billable career. That is our CARC certification. I'm a certified addiction recovery coach. I have a private practice. I do not work in the Medicaid billable system. The value of certification to you is that it confirms that the certificate is, in the opinion of the certifying board, a competent and ethical professional. Whether you're in the Medicaid reimbursable job role, which is the CRPA, or whether you're a certified addiction recovery coach working in private practice. For the purposes of this morning, we're looking very specifically at the CRPA role. CRPA is the Medicaid reimbursable peer role in the substance use disorder system. And as Joe mentioned, the peer specialist is the certification you must have to work as a Medicaid reimbursable employee in the mental health system. CRPA, the advocate, is the parallel certification that you must have if you want to work in a Medicaid reimbursable position. So the value of certification is that it confirms that you are a competent and ethical professional. Certification advertises your role competencies. The fact that you can say that your CRPA says, I have this knowledge, these skills and abilities, and therefore your certification promotes transparency of practice. And finally, the value of holding a certification is that it ensures ethical practice, because you are being held accountable to the profession's published code of ethical conduct. So this is how certification serves your professional goals. And that's why certification is a primary value for you as a professional. And that's why we recommend certification. The fact that CRPA carries with it the Medicaid billable piece, that is value add. That's an added value. So that's the value to you of certification. So we're talking about certified recovery peer advocates. Let's spend a moment just to think about what that recovery word means. Recovery is defined by the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, federal level, as a process through which individuals improve their health and wellness, live a self-directed life, and strive to reach their full potential. So when we're talking about being a certified recovery peer advocate, that's what the word recovery means. When we talk about being a peer, first let's talk a little bit about the peer recovery engagement. The purpose of the peer recovery engagement, what you will be doing, is embodying and leveraging a personal vision of substance use disorder recovery and supporting individuals building their own recovery capital. What you bring, the professional authority that you bring, is your lived experience and your communication skills, your expertise. The components of your profession are practice-specific education, profession-specific ethics, and role-specific certification. As we said, promoting a promotional and protective value, ensuring transparent and accountable practice. So again, certification here is one of three components of your profession, a means, not an end. There are three peer recovery professional roles certifiable in New York State. CRPA is the Medicaid billable peer recovery role, and CRPA family is a specialization under CRPA introduced on July 1 of this year. CARC is the non-Medicaid billable certified addiction recovery coach role. So there's a snapshot of the peer recovery profession. And now my PowerPoint seems okay, great. So the first piece of this is that we share a personal message of recovery across a lifetime. That's what peers do, bring our vision of recovery, and we support individuals as they develop their sustainable life in recovery. There's a vision of recovery for you. That's what recovery means to me today. You know it's me because if you look down on the silhouette, you can see she's wearing pearls. You also know it's me because there's a lot of color in this vision. And for me, my life in recovery today is colorful. And here's a fun little graphic describing building recovery capital. We support individuals developing their sustainable life in recovery, their recovery capital. That's what we do. And we do that based on our own experience, coming from a personal history of or exposure to three things. Not just substance use disorder itself, but also the process of change and our own sustainable life in recovery, and the expertise to apply that knowledge to the skill of helping others establish and live in their own definition and pathway of recovery across a lifetime. So this is a very valuable contribution to the continuum of care in the substance use disorder field. We add unique value to the continuum of care. We improve efficacy. This has been shown that we improve efficacy and outcomes, and we build recovery capital by leveraging our experience. I've been there, maybe I can help. We bring our expertise to purposeful conversations. How can I help you with your recovery today? And we help navigate systems to connect treatment and therapy clients with recovery resources. Take my hand and let's walk this journey together. Clearly a unique and important role in the continuum of care. And this would be me having difficulty with technical navigation. Certification is a voluntary credentialing process in support of career building goals. We've already said that certification confirms that you have met all published requirements for the credential and that you have demonstrated your ability to perform this professional role competently and ethically. Certification in non-clinical peer recovery is offered by ASAP New York Certification Board. Unlike Joe's board, we are a non-governmental organization. We are not funded by OASIS. In New York State, Medicaid regulations require professionals to be CRPA certified for employment in a reimbursable peer recovery job. CARC is not relevant to Medicaid reimbursable jobs. It's why we're not focused on CARC this morning. And certification is not a license. It's not a license because it's voluntary. It's not legally required to practice in the non-clinical role. And we spoke about that. So certification is a value to you, to your potential employer, to the people you're going to be working with, and to the public at large, because certification confirms both transparency and accountability in your practice. You're a committed professional. You're not some yahoo irresponsibly hanging a shingle. You're a professional with a certification that shows that you have a transparent and accountable practice. What does that look like? Here are the published knowledge, skills, and abilities required for certifiable roles. Up on the top left-hand corner, here's that document I spoke about earlier. This is the what you need to know to be a certified recovery peer advocate. This at the top left-hand corner, a selection of 54 competencies that you need to have studied and to practice in order to be competent in the CRPA role. And here is that document broken down. 4 subject areas, or as we call them in the techno speak, domains. And there we see listed out 54 competencies that you will study and become proficient in, and that you will bring as knowledge, skills, and abilities you will bring to your practice as certified recovery peer advocates. These competencies are published on our website for everybody to read. So when you stand up in your community and you say, I am a CRPA, a certified recovery peer advocate, you can point people to this document available on our website and say, this is what I know, this is what I can do. This is who I am as a professional. This is what I've studied. This is what I've been tested on. This is what I've shown I know. Certification itself. Just want to speak very briefly about certification itself and what it is. Many people have come on this call with a question about why are there 2 separate certifications? Why can't we just push them together? Why can't we make up a new certification? Why can't we just make it happen? It's a great question. It's a really great question. And to answer that question, I want to bring us back to what is a certification? The question of what is a certification. We've spoken about the value to you of holding a certification, whether it's in the mental health system or the substance use disorder system. But what is a certification itself? A certification is developed over a 10-step development process. Ruth and Joe do not wake up on a random Tuesday morning, sign a piece of paper, and declare that there's a new certification. That would not be a legally defensible move on our part. That certification would have no validity whatsoever. It would not promote a transparent or an accountable practice. It would just be stuff Ruth and Joe made up on an arbitrary Tuesday morning. And as ethical professionals, we do not make stuff up. We adhere to appropriate protocols. In developing a certification, the first piece that has to happen is that the field needs to identify a unique role that needs to be developed in terms of identified competencies, knowledge, skills, and abilities. Specific training will need to be developed to support that role and the development of professionals within that role. A certification board has to be identified who will take on the business of certifying that role, managing that role, managing applications, managing the certifications, managing ethical standards, implementing and overseeing ethical standards. None of this is impossible, but every certification currently existing has been through this 10-step process. And any proposed new certification, and there's a lot of talk in the field, for example, about a criminal justice CRPA. There's a lot of talk in the field about other parenthetics under CRPA that might be valuable. Just as there's talk here of a potential merged certification that might be valuable. Field needs it. Field needs to advocate for it, and the technical commitments need to be undertaken, and funding for the development process will need to be found. You will find this development process on our website. And you will also find the Code of Ethical Conduct in our profession, downloadable from our website, also available to the public. You'll find this document on our website that describes the differences between the non-clinical roles in substance use disorder. For our purposes this morning, the key difference is we're focused on CRPA because, like Joe's certification, it is Medicaid billable in the substance use disorder system. Also posted on our website, again, on the right side, you will see requirements that you must demonstrate you meet in order to apply for the certifications, and you will find application forms on our website. The most recent development under CRPA is the introduction of a CRPA provisional. Again, this document describes what CRPA provisional is and how it supports your career goals on that step ladder to CRPA. And the last piece that you need to complete for certification as a certified recovery peer advocate is you need to pass an exam. We offer an exam prep workshop in the community to support you preparing for that exam. Details again on our website, at the URL given on this slide. And I'm just about to wrap up here, hoping that I have answered some of your questions, maybe raised some more. There again, 6 steps to CRPA. There's the overview of the process. This is the new, these are requirements for the new parenthetic under CRPA. It's a lateral expansion of the CRPA role. You will need to be CRPA in good standing in order to pursue training for the CRPA family role. There's a dedicated website, a web page on our website talking about this role. And on January 1, we will also introduce the parenthetic CRPA Youth. Again, details on a dedicated web page at ASAP New York Certification Board. These are the resources at ASAP available to you. This is who the board is. We're not faceless bureaucrats. We are these folks all active in the recovery community at one level or another throughout the state. Over on the right-hand side, you see thumbnailed representations of the application forms for CRPA and for CRPA provisional. You are not on your path to certification until you complete one of those applications. In that middle row, the application for the CRPA family parenthetic. What is a parenthetic? Parenthetic is quite simply a fancy word to describe a specialization under CRPA. Again, to invite you folks to think about those questions you came into this webinar with. Have they either been explicitly answered? Possibly not, because I did not go into a lot of detail about certification itself. Certification is a means, not the end. And what's important here is, what are your goals? What do you want to achieve? Where can certification support you there? And that technical information about certification is all available on our website. There's our website address. Please email me with follow-up questions. See me in 2 weeks' time in Florida at the CCAR National Recovery Conference. 3 days talking about recovery. And here is my Hibernian wish for your success in building that fabulous new career and in supporting others build that fabulous new career in the peer recovery profession. Thank you so much for giving me a hearing this morning. I look forward to seeing you in my email inbox and to supporting you in your career development process. Thank you.
Thank you, Ruth. That was wonderful. A clear and very detailed explanation. And I just wanted to verify, you do want to go to your website just to do a quick show and tell before I have Joe do his, because I do want to get to our questions, but I also want to have Joe have an opportunity to show the comparable, site.
Thanks so much. Thanks so much, Rita. I do think it's very valuable to see both of these websites, because here we are directing traffic to our website. The website is the repository of technical information. Every document I've referenced this morning is available on the website asapnys.org under the New York Certification Board web pages. On our homepage, you see a bulleted list of all of the information that you can find on this website. There's quite a lot of it there with live links to every piece of it. We don't have to make this stuff up. It already exists on our website. We do update the website relatively often. We're an emerging field. We're an evolving field. We try to be flexible in responding to real world issues as they arise from the community. So when you have a question in your practice, come back to the website, see if there's latest information here, see what the authoritative information is, and if you can't find the information you need here, you have my email address. Follow up with me by email and I will get you that information. Frankly, it's my personal mission in life to put so much information on the website that I'll make my own job redundant, and then I can just go to the movies. But for now, here we are with the website as the resource and the go-to place for information on certification in substance use disorder system. Thank you.
Too funny, Ruth. Thank you. That was good. And I've looked through the website. It's just a wealth of information. So with that, just to stay a little bit on track with time, or try to get a little bit back on track with time, Joe, if you want to jump in and give us a real quick show and tell of the New York Certification Board site, that would be great.
And it should come up here in just a second. So our website is not quite as detailed and fancy at the moment as the one Ruth has. We are in the process of creating a new website, which we anticipate out at our conference next month. But we do have our information here, as well as information about our conference and its rollout. We do have the ability for people to download applications. We have the ability for people to do renewals of their application online. You can't do the initial application. That's a little more involved than the renewal, but the renewal process can be done online. We also offer our code of ethical conduct because as a certified peer specialist, you do agree to abide by that ethics and discipline policy, as well as our frequently asked questions. We have additional information on our menus up here about the board and our frequently asked questions, as well as renewal and how to contact us. I will agree with Ruth also on contact. It is much better for you to contact us via email. And if you notice the email link down here at the bottom, info@nypeerspecialist.org, that link will get you both to myself and our board coordinator, Tyrone Garrett, who handles all of the technical details on individual certifications. He's the one that processes all of the certifications for the board and on their behalf. So you would be able to get 2 for 1 if you do the email, and so either Tyrone or I will be able to see and respond to your email. So email is the best way to contact us as well as contacting Ruth. So at that rate, I'm going to turn it back to you, and I'm going to mute myself.
Okay, thanks, Joe. I think this should come up. Okay, so as we had left off with you talking a little bit about the the grid of which certification is most applicable for what audience, and because the audio was a little bit low at that point, Joe, if you'd like to just talk about that for just a minute, and then we'll go to the questions. Joe, did you mute yourself?
Helps if I unmute. So are we talking, you're talking about the grid here?
Yeah.
Yeah, and I've had some discussions in chat, and Ruth also mentioned this, but when you're talking about the groups of people that you're wanting to work with, if you're wanting to work with people that have pretty much the same amount of impairment or the same amount of issues, whether it be mental health or addiction, really either a CRPA or a CPS based on your own recovery journey is an appropriate credential. But if you're going to be working with peers that are primarily folks with high addiction needs, even though they may have some mental health issues, their outstanding things that they're dealing with in their recovery journey are addiction related, and that also lines up with your recovery journey, then a CRPA is likely the best credential that you should pursue. If you're going to be dealing and your recovery journey is primarily around mental health issues, again, even if there is some co-occurring, a certified peer specialist is likely the best credential for you. We do have, and we both boards have talked about this over the years, we do have people that have lots of issues, and it would be very difficult to say whether their issues are primarily addiction related or primarily mental health related. And in those cases, it is good to have a combined CRPA CPS credential. Right now, there's several differences. Both fields are very new in their development, and someone asked what I meant when I said problematic. I mean that the issues related to teasing out the differences between the approach. For those of you who are on the mental health side, you will recognize that the view towards treatment is very different than the view towards treatment on the addiction side. The inclusion of many of our people on the mental health side from the psychiatric survivor point of view, as well as just the fact that to be a CPS, you are required to have test to lived experience. I don't believe, Ruth, unless you guys have changed that, CRPA requires that. I know they had wanted to over the years, but I don't know whether they ever actually made that change. But one of the ways we've talked about sort of bridging the gap, rather than make people do a restart, if you're a CRPA and you want to become a CPS, that both boards could look at and develop a fast track so that we could say, here are the basics that you've already got because you're a CRPA, that we will accept towards your CPS, and then you only need these mental health related things to add to it. Likewise, CRPA, the CRPA board doing the same thing. We've had discussions about that over the years. Staff changes and things have not really brought that forward, but I think now's the time that Ruth and I can work with both our boards about the possibility of that fast track movement. But both these professions are in a very young phase as far as they're developing. And I think before we look at a shared credential, we need to look at more things like fast tracking and developing those professions until we are at a phase where we could look at maybe a shared lived experience, or however we would want to describe it, credential that honors both treatment systems, peers, and their different views of how things are to be approached in ways that we could come up with something that is workable. The bifurcation in New York is somewhat a factor of the fact that we have two different state authorities. We have a mental health authority and we have a addiction and alcoholism authority. Other states don't have that, and so their system itself is not bifurcated. So those are some of the issues that we have to address that are unique to New York. I don't think they're unsurmountable, but I would say that they are things that are going to be a while down the road before they can be surmounted.
I have a list of questions that I want to go through, and if we have time, please put your questions in the chat, because I would like to gather the questions and then present those questions to Joe and Ruth if we don't get to them in the webinar, so we can come up with a list of questions and answers, afterwards, which we will send out to everybody who has been registered for the webinar. Does that work for everybody? Hopefully, because if not, that's how I'm doing it. All right, so I wanted to start a question for both Joe and Ruth, and that is, what qualifies as peer for each of the two certifications? What is meant by the term peer?
The question of what defines a peer is a question that's been around for a very long time. Joe began, I think, looking at this question, what is a peer, when he referred to the shared experience paradigm as being what motivates peers in the mental health system. That idea of shared experience, that you define peer as being a person with shared experience. Back in the 1970s, which is neither today nor yesterday, and I put money on it that there are people participating on this webinar today who weren't even born in 1976. But Professor Thomasina Borkman, who is quoted by William White, Professor Thomasina Borkman at George Mason University, was equally fascinated by this question, who or what is a peer? And very particularly, how is it that peer engagement, that, sort of that one-on-one, peer-to-peer, bozo-to-bozo conversation proves to be so effective? She thought that this was an important question to look at. And what she came up with is what we use in the substance use disorder field as a definition of a peer. A peer is a person who brings both experience and expertise to purposeful conversation. What is that experience? That's the experience of substance use disorder itself, either my own or my experience as an ally of someone with substance use disorder. That's the first thing. The second thing is my experience of the process of change. Well, Ruth, 2 years ago, you were living under a railway bridge with a needle hanging out of your arm. How come you're now able to get a mortgage? What happened? What was the change? The process of change. Do I understand the process of change? Have I experience of the process of change? Can I walk you through the process of change for yourself? And the third piece of experience that we look for in a peer is the experience of building a sustainable life in recovery yourself. Do you have the building blocks of a life in recovery that has a present and a future in it? Do you yourself have stable housing? How did you put that together? Do you yourself have a stable income? How did you put that together? Do you yourself have a job? How the hell did you get a job when we all know you have a resume that looks like Swiss cheese? It's got so many holes in it. Because instead of building a career path, you were out there using. These are the kind of issues that your experience are going to be very valuable in the peer role. And your expertise is going to be in those communication skills, those connecting with individuals who you work with, communicating that experience as it is helpful for those individuals as they build their own sustainable lives in recovery. That's how we define a peer in the substance use disorder field, with immense thanks to the work of Professor Thomasina Borkman in the 70s.
Thanks, and seminal work, absolutely.
Rita,
yep.
Rita, this is Joe. If I could kind of jump in on that as well. We worked a long time about how to define peer status because in the mental health field, it's been an ongoing, even with definitions from many of our wonderful academics, Bill Anthony and others, it still is an open debate about what is a peer. So what we came up with was a very broad statement that the peer status that you have to attest to for our certification
is that you are actively in recovery from a mental health condition or major life disruption, and that you self-disclose your journey. So really, we're looking at, are you in recovery from whether you want to call it a mental health condition or you want to call it something that greatly disrupts your life, which could include addiction, by the way. And are you willing to self-disclose that? Are you willing to help share your journey in ways that help others? So it's is very much in parallel with what Ruth was just describing from the 1970s definition. We've just tried to sort of get this down to an area that we felt would be something people could, throughout the mental health field, could attest to and feel good about, saying, yes, I meet that standard of peer status.
Thanks so much, Joe. I have had a couple of questions come up about why there's a difference in the required number of work experience hours for the different certifications. Could you address that?
You want me to go first?
Sure.
I'll let Ruth address from her standpoint. I can't say, well, how they came up with theirs. I can say that ours was based on a review of certification programs across the country. You can look at University of Texas School of Social Work as a prime source for information, and they do a review about every 2 to 3 years of certification and training programs throughout the states. And as we looked at the various programs, it really did vary. States varied everywhere from as little as 500 to, in some cases, more than 2,000. We decided to go with, our peer leaders decided to go with 2,000 as a level of experience that we felt would qualify somebody for the base, for their what we call their standard certification. The reason we added at the very beginning a provisional certification was so people with no experience could begin working in the field and working towards that standard level and get that 1 year of experience. 2,000 hours equates to the equivalent of 1 year of full-time experience. And so we wanted people to be able to have that, but with the provisional, they can begin working in the field while they attain that, and they can get the provisional renewed if they're working part-time and don't get 2,000 hours in 1 calendar year.
Thank you, Joe. Ruth?
I'd like to look at this question. I really, first of all, let me say I really appreciate Joe's explanation there. That's very, very helpful and very clear. But I'd like to look at this question again in the context of what is the whole point of certification. The point about certification is to confirm the person who is certified is competent in the role. And that competence, there are several pieces to that competence. Experience on the ground is only one of them. Specialized training and an ethical commitment is another. You demonstrate competence by passing an exam. That's an integral part of most certification processes. The experience, the role experience, the experience on the ground is particularly valuable, I think, when we're talking about a role, and this would be true in both Joe's mental health system and in the substance use disorder system. This role is primarily a role based on communication skills. We're having hours in the field where we're practicing being radically present in those purposeful conversations is clearly a major value in demonstrating our competence. And for that reason, subject matter experts who defined the role in the first place identified the number of hours that they felt from their experience would demonstrate competence and came up with the figure of 500 hours. Certification, the basis of any certification, the job task analysis, and the role competencies are, as Joe says, reviewed periodically, and the certification underlying CRPA will be reviewed somewhere in late 2020 and early 2021. So it may be that we see introduced in 2021, it may be that we see some additional standards introduced, some additional requirements introduced. That's a wait and see. For today's standards and requirements, see the website.
Thanks, Ruth. I have like a lot of questions here, and I know we're not going to have enough time to get to all of them, but one that was that's come up quite often is what are the requirements to be a supervisor of someone with each of these certifications? And that's kind of a Medicaid question, I think, more than anything else, because both of these are Medicaid reimbursable certifications. Joe, Ruth, which one of you would like to start with that?
I'd really like to jump in on this, if I may, because this is a question that I'm asked a lot. The role of a certification board is very specifically focused on defining and managing the role. And our certifications confirm that you are competent in the role. Not responsible for employment issues. We're not responsible for human resources issues, although we do have expertise that can be useful to policymakers at agencies who are thinking about their human resources policies. But I want to draw a very clear distinction between the role of a certification board, any certification board, and the role of an individual employer. In the case of Medicaid reimbursable jobs, you have to be, as Joe said earlier this morning, you have to be certified either in his system for OMH or in the substance use disorder system for OASIS. You have to be certified to be Medicaid reimbursable, for your services to be Medicaid reimbursable by the agency. Once the agency employs you in a Medicaid reimbursable role, once you are employed to provide Medicaid reimbursable services, you become subject to Medicaid regulations. Medicaid regulations stipulate that supervision of peers, of Medicaid reimbursable peers, supervision of Medicaid reimbursable peers is the job of and must be provided by qualified health professionals, QHPs. That's a Medicaid regulation, very distinct from the requirements of your role certification. That's a Medicaid requirement. It's raising issues in the field because qualified health professionals come from a clinical background and we are non-clinical workers. And so there are some potential difficulties there. There is an OASIS approved 12-hour training for QHPs who are supervisors of peers. And if those supervisors who take that training will be awarded 12 hours towards their own professional renewals, certification renewals, or license renewals, I should say. So that's a very valuable first step for the supervisors of peers to undertake as they adjust to this new role of supervising peers under Medicaid regulations in Medicaid reimbursable positions in individual agencies. hope I've made that clear rather than confused.
Thanks, Ruth. Joe?
And I'd add to that, though, that this is one of those areas where our boards do have a little bit of a difference in view of things. And my view of this, Ruth, comes from much of the work we did at the national level in getting the Medicaid guidance put out. The guidance has a statement in there that says qualified mental health professional as defined by the state. So the ideal would be someone who is both a person who is a practitioner and a person in recovery. That was our ideal. That was our gold standard. And the gold standard that we were working against from the people on the Medicaid side was it had to be a psychiatrist all the time. So you see we had a huge gulf there. What we are looking at on the mental health side, and we don't see this as a strictly human resource point of view, because supervision involves more than just looking at things from the with the clinical treatment and services, but it involves developing that person and their craft as a peer specialist. So there is both task supervision and role supervision. So we are developing, and this mimics the certification that our mental health family peers have, that will be a third level for people that wish to supervise peer specialists. This level of certification, supervisory certification, will be available both to mental health professionals and to certified peer specialists. And we are currently working with APS and others around the training that will be required for this. But we will eventually offer in the mental health field a certification for supervisors so that those that are going to be supervising, whether they are people who have come up through the CPS track or whether they're people that have come through a clinical track, both have a shared knowledge base. It's a step beyond perhaps the 12-hour training course that OASIS is offering now, because we do currently have some online training for supervisors now through APS, but this is a more rigorously developed piece that we're working on, and hopefully sometime next year the initial drafts of this will be available for folks to look at.
Super fabulous. And I totally agree that supervision is a mix of management function and mentoring function. Not necessarily available yet in the substance use disorder system, but peers are taking matters into their own hands, which I think shows a great promise for the future. And we're seeing spontaneously coming up in the community around the state, peer learning collaboratives. I'm thinking particularly of the initiative in Rochester. And this is something that we will look to for the future as an opportunity where peer recovery professionals get that professional nurturance that we're looking for.
Thanks so much, Ruth. And that's a really good note to leave on. I realize that there are a lot of questions that we did not have a chance to get to. Making sure that I pull in the questions from the chat and questions that we had pre-submitted. I will give them to Ruth and Joe to take a look at. And I just really want to try to move my slides. You can go. Really, you can. Here again is their email addresses and the websites for the two certification boards. I will be sharing the slides that I have, and Ruth may share a subset of, or just really the links to the places on her website that she talked about earlier today. And I also wanted the New York State Office of Mental Health, Office of Consumer Affairs, and providing technical assistance to us, and to Varsha Kamat, who also has been standing by in case we needed to have additional technical. Again, this a webinar of the Academy of Peer Services and our virtual learning community. There is a wealth of information there, and we're always looking for more. So if you have anything to share, like Joe's, like the Peer Board Conference, which is coming up on November 18th and 19th, please, if you have an opportunity to come, there's information on our virtual community website about that, and I will send the links to that along with the follow-up email to this particular session. So thank you all very much. One question that I will be asking Ruth, and we'll probably put into the very beginning of the follow-up, is what do you see as the future of peer certification, and what do you see the trends as? So that's going to be my first question to Joe and Ruth, and I'll ask them to answer that in a format, in like an email format that we'll send out to everybody who registered. Thank you again for attending, and have a good day.